No one ever picked me. I used to say those words inside my own head, over and over, like a small song that never changed its tune. I was a dragon hatchling, but not the kind anyone wanted. My scales were a dull gray, not the shining gold or deep red that made buyers smile. My left wing had grown crooked from the day I broke out of my shell, folding the wrong way no matter how many times the handlers tried to straighten it. My voice was thin and small, more like a whistle than a roar. On my home world, Kethrasi, dragons were not simply pets. They were symbols of power. Great houses bonded with strong hatchlings to show their wealth and their standing. A dragon with a broken wing was worth nothing to them. So I sat in my crate at the auction pit for 6 long days, watching boots walk past me, one pair after another, never stopping. My brothers and sisters from the same clutch were sold within hours. I watched them go, one by one, carried off by proud nobles who barely looked at their faces before deciding they were worth owning. I was the last one left. The auctioneer stopped calling my number. Even the handlers stopped bringing me water on time, as if I had already become invisible. Then, on the 6th day, a human stopped in front of my crate. Humans were not native to Kethrasi. They came from far away, working on labor contracts, fixing machines that the dragon people considered too dirty or too difficult for themselves. Most of them kept their heads down and did their work quietly, but this one crouched low, right in front of my cage, his knees cracking as he bent down. He smelled like oil and burnt metal, and a little like something sweet he must have eaten earlier that day. He looked at me for a long moment. Not at my wing, not at my dull scales. He looked at my eyes. "Hey," he said, using simple words in my language. "Why is this one still here?" The handler standing nearby barely glanced up from his notebook. "Defective," he said. "Wing is bent. Voice is weak." No house wants a dragon that cannot fly properly. I remember feeling something twist inside my chest when he called me it. I had a name. Nobody had ever bothered to ask for it, but I still had one. My name was Vess. The human reached his hand through the bars of my crate. I flinched, expecting him to grab my jaw the way buyers always did, checking my teeth, checking the strength of my legs, deciding my worth like I was a piece of furniture. But his hand did not grab anything. It just stayed there, palm open, waiting. "Come here, little guy," he said softly. "I don't care about your wing." I did not understand him. Not fully. Why would anyone want a broken hatchling? I could not fly. I could not be shown off in a parade. I could not fight for a house in the arena. I was, by every measure my world used, worthless. But he paid for me anyway. Not with a large sum of money, because he did not have much, but with almost everything he had saved from months of repair work. The handler seemed surprised, maybe even a little amused, that anyone would pay real money for a hatchling he was ready to throw away. His name, printed on a small tag on his uniform, was Kovacs. Later I learned that everyone simply called him Danny. That night, he carried my crate back to the small metal room where he lived, near the loud machines of the repair yard. It was not fancy. The walls were made of dented metal sheets, and the air smelled like fuel and dust. But it was warm, because he rigged up a small heater using spare wires he found in a scrap bin. "You'll be okay here," he told me, setting my crate down gently. "Nobody's going to grab your jaw or poke at your wing anymore. Not while I'm around." I did not trust him at first. Trust was not something I had been given a reason to feel. For days, I stayed curled in the corner of my crate, watching him work on broken engines and machines late into the night. But he never raised his voice at me. He never left me hungry. Even when the company that hired him was late paying his wages, he still saved part of his food for me, breaking off pieces of his own meal and sliding them through the bars. Slowly, I began to understand something new. He was not measuring my value by what I could do for him. He was simply taking care of me because I needed someone to. One evening, as he worked under a hovering cargo hauler with grease covering his arms, he started talking to me the way he always did, explaining what he was doing, as if I could understand every word. "You know," he said, tightening a bolt with a wrench held between his teeth, "your wing being bent isn't really the problem people think it is. It's just unusual. Everyone on this planet thinks a wing has to be perfect to be useful, but perfect isn't the same as useful." I tilted my head, listening closely, even though I still did not fully understand human speech at that time. Back where I come from, he continued, we don't throw away a machine just because one part doesn't work the normal way. We figure out how to build around it. Maybe we can do the same thing for you. I did not know what he meant then, but over the following months, I began to see it happen with my own eyes. Danny started sketching designs on old scraps of paper during his breaks. He studied how dragons flew, watching videos and reading old manuals he borrowed from the repair yard library. He learned that dragons like me used a mix of natural lift and wing movement to fly, something like a cross between real biology and old dragon magic that scientists still did not fully understand. My left wing could not create enough thrust because of how it had grown crooked, but my right wing, and my body's natural lift, were still strong and healthy. So, he said one night, holding up a small metal device he had built from spare drone parts, what if we give your bad wing a little help, not replace it, just support it? It took him many months to build what he called a thrust harness. He worked on it after his long shifts fixing other machines, using parts nobody else wanted, buying small tools with money he barely had. Some nights he fell asleep at his workbench, wrench still in his hand, tiny sparks glowing from unfinished wiring nearby. I watched him fail more times than I could count. The first harness he built was too heavy, and it made me tip sideways whenever I tried to stand. The second one leaked fuel and had to be redesigned completely. The third one worked, but only for a few seconds before overheating. Yet Danny never seemed angry when something failed. He would just sigh, wipe his forehead and say, "Okay, not that. Let's try something else." I began to notice something important during those months. Nobody on Kethrasi had ever told me that failure could simply be a step toward something better. In my world, mistakes were shameful. Weakness was hidden, not studied and improved. But Danny treated every failed attempt like a puzzle piece, something to learn from, rather than something to be embarrassed about. Finally, after 4 months of quiet work, he finished a fourth version of the harness. It was small, fitted carefully along my back and my crooked wing, with 2 tiny thrusters built from a broken drone he had rescued from a junk pile. "All right," he said, strapping it gently onto my back one cool evening, his hands steady despite how nervous he looked. "Let's see if this actually works." We walked out to the open area behind the scrapyard, a wide stretch of cracked pavement surrounded by tall metal fences. My heart pounded inside my chest. I had never truly flown before, not once in my entire life. "Whenever you're ready," Danny said, stepping back with his arms crossed, trying to look calm even though I could see his hands were shaking slightly. I spread my wings. My crooked left wing wobbled unevenly, just like it always had. But this time, I felt the small thrusters hum to life, pushing air exactly where my wing could not. I pushed off the ground. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought I would fall. But then, something clicked into place, some balance I had never felt before, and I lifted higher into the air. I was flying. Not perfectly, not gracefully, like the dragons from noble houses who soared over their fortresses in smooth, practiced circles. My flight was a little shaky, a little uneven, but it was real. The wind rushed past my scales as I rose higher, banking in a slow curve above the scrapyard. Below me, I heard Danny laughing, a loud, joyful sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You're doing it," he shouted, jumping up and waving both arms. "Vess, you're actually doing it." I circled twice above him, before landing clumsily nearby, nearly tripping over my own feet. Danny ran over and knelt beside me, checking the harness with careful hands, making sure nothing had overheated or come loose. But underneath his careful checking, I could see he was smiling so wide, it looked like his face might hurt. That night, for the first time since I had hatched, I did not feel like a broken thing. I felt like something new, something built, not by magic or bloodline, but by patience, effort, and someone who simply refused to give up on me. News about a flying defective dragon traveled quickly, even in a place as busy as the repair yard. Workers from other stations came to watch me practice flying in the evenings. Some laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of trick or joke. But when they saw me actually lift off the ground and glide steadily through the air, their laughter turned into quiet amazement. Eventually, word reached some of the noble houses that had once refused to even look at me during the auction. A few of them sent messengers, offering large sums of money for the harness design, or even trying to buy me directly, now that I had become something interesting to show off. Danny turned down every single offer. "You're not a machine part," he told me one evening, sitting beside my crate with a mug of something warm in his hands. "You're my friend. Friends aren't something you sell just because someone finally noticed they're valuable." I did not fully understand the weight of those words back then, but I understand them now, many years later. As time passed, I grew larger and stronger. Danny kept improving the harness, building smaller, more efficient versions as he learned more about dragonflight and human engineering combined. My wing never became straight. It still hangs a little crooked to this day, but it no longer holds me back. Years later, other hatchlings, ones considered broken or unwanted by their houses, began arriving at our small workshop. Handlers who once ignored creatures like me started remembering the strange story of the human mechanic who did not care about wings being perfect. They brought hatchlings with twisted legs, weak voices, dull scales, all creatures nobody else wanted. Danny welcomed every single one of them the same way he welcomed me. No judgment, no impatience, just quiet, steady work. Late nights bent over sketches and tools, trying to figure out how each creature's differences could become strengths instead of weaknesses. I remember one small hatchling, even smaller than I had been, trembling inside her crate the first night she arrived. I sat beside her cage, the way Danny once sat beside mine, and told her the same words I still remember from all those years ago. "No one ever picks the broken ones," I told her gently, "until someone finally does. And when that happens, you learn something important. You were never truly broken. You were only waiting for someone who builds instead of judges." She looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes, the same way I must have looked at Danny on that very first night. Danny, working nearby on a tangled mess of wires, glanced over and gave a small, tired smile. "Dramatic reptile," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head slightly, but I could hear the warmth hidden behind his teasing words. He always picked the crooked ones, every single time, not because he saw profit or fame in it, but because he understood something that so many others on Kethrasi never seemed to grasp. Worth is not something given to you simply because of how you were born, or how perfect your body happens to be. Worth is something built, slowly, patiently, by people willing to look past the surface and ask a simple, powerful question. What could this become, if only someone gave it a chance? I still fly today, my crooked wing balanced by small, humming thrusters that Danny keeps upgrading, whenever he finds new parts or new ideas. Sometimes, when I glide high above the scrapyard, looking down at the winding metal fences and old machines below, I think back to those 6 long days sitting inside my crate, listening to boots pass by that never stopped. I think about how easily my story could have ended differently if a tired, oil-stained mechanic had simply walked past me like everyone else. But he didn't. He stopped. He looked. He reached out his open hand, and he picked me. And because of that one small choice, made by someone with very little money, and even less reason to care, I learned the truest lesson of my entire life. Sometimes, the ones who seem the most ordinary end up changing everything, not through great power, or magic, or noble bloodlines, but through simple kindness, patience, and the quiet decision to never give up on someone others have already decided is not worth saving. No one ever picked me, until someone finally did,